As Renee just mentioned, I'm Malachi with Esri, and I'm going to talk to you about how we use the ArcGIS platform to go from big data to big understanding. And one of the things before we begin, I want to start with setting a little bit of context. With the human brain was designed to think linearly. And what I mean by that is we try to solve our problems in a linear fashion. We look where things are, and then we draw, if we want to predict out in the future, we draw a linear line to where things might happen. Well, as volume and technology increase at an exponential rate, we have to significantly change the way we look and solve problems. We have to not think outside the box. We have to think in a completely different box. And we have to understand how that technology relates. And really, we have to think at an exponential fashion. If technology is changing in an exponential fashion and data is increasing in an exponential fashion, we have to think at an exponential fashion. And a good example I like to use is if I ask somebody where they would be if they took 30 paces, anybody in this room can pick a spot and say, I could probably be there in about 30 steps. What if I asked you guys, where would you be in 30 exponential steps? That's 1 step, 2 step, 4 steps, 8 steps. How far would you be? Can anybody wrap their head around that? Just give me, raise your hand. Somebody give me a number. Most people would say 1 mile. 1 mile, 2 miles, 30 exponential steps. In reality, you'll be 13 times around the Earth, right? That's what I'm talking about. Understanding these volumes, understanding these concepts, and how we take that down in a fashion where we can disseminate it. Again, we have to change the way we think, and we have to change the way that we solve problems. So one of the first things, there's still a bit of context when we start talking about big data. And you have big data and you're in big data space when your traditional means fail you. And that really kind of boils it down. And because what big data is somebody and what big data is somebody else is two different things. If you have a user that's trying to load a spreadsheet with 1 million rows on it and their computer keeps crashing, well, they're in big data space. Now, NSA looks at that and laughs. Or people in Silicon Valley, or people like Esri look at 1 million tables, 1 million rows and say that's not big data. Point being is, it's all relative to where you are in the world to what your problems are. We still have to solve your problems to what you need. A couple of concepts when we talk about big data. Big data comes in the big 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety. And we're going to show you how we're going to tackle each one of these with the Esri platform. So a couple of big data challenges. I'm a big proponent of dots on a map. I'm a big proponent of things happen in time and space. You have to analyze data in time and space. If not, you're not going to fully understand the picture. When you start looking at patterns of life, when you start looking at how things happen, where things happen, how things relate, analyzing that information, how associated in time and space is critically important. So what we do is we start with points on a map. Well, when you have 1 billion points on a map, that's not helpful, right? And we use a lot of big data technologies to get us to this point where we have a lot of dots on a map. But where's my decision point? Where's my information point? Well, we use the Esri platform to start driving that. So now I can normalize that and understand where things are happening. I can understand where things are important to me. The other concept is time. So I might not have a volume as far as mass, but I have a volume as far as a lot of things happening in that time. So where are things relative to space and time, and how are they relative to each other? Well, now I can start making sense of that information and start making sense of that data. And the third concept, or another challenge, is variety. So I need to start laying this out in a way where I don't just have polygons, but I have polygons that make sense. I have polygons that are telling me information, giving me to the point of decision points. So I go from that large volume of data to the decision point and understand where that is on a local and linear level. And probably the most important concept is relationships. Understanding that association of people over space and time, understanding how things work over space and time is critical, especially in the defense space. And I got a great example of talking about this later. So when we start talking about the Esri platform, one of the first concepts we talk about with the big data challenges is velocity. So if we look at our architecture here, we handle velocity with live data feeds and live sensor feeds. And that can happen at the millisecond level, coming in and processing that data. And we do that with a tool we call GeoEvent Processor. And we process it in real time, and we analyze the data in real time so we can display it and make decision points on it in its real-time level. Well, that's good for what's happening today. Well, what's happening today doesn't necessarily help us because we need to know what's happening today, what did happen, and then what will happen. So as this data comes in at velocity, we then store it at volume. We store it at volume in our big data geospatial data store. And the volume allows us to start doing predictive analytics with it, start understanding how these information relates to itself over space and time from many different data sources. And then we start pushing that out via geoanalytics to then make those next available steps. And all this is available on any device, anywhere, anytime. Radios, computers, pushed out via the web and web analytics. And this is actively being done right now across soft space. So I do want to hit on a little bit of machine learning and machine learning tools and algorithms. So we start looking at how we boil things down. We got classification, likelihood, clustering, and then more important, we start doing predictive analytics. We start having our regression points, where things happening, and understanding space-time. These machine learning tools are built into the ArcGIS platform. They're built in to start understanding where and how data relates from multiple different data sources, multiple different data types. So a good example I like to use is this is 1 billion bank transactions happening across the United States. Again, we looked at a bunch of points on a map is important, but what's it really telling me? How am I finding this? Well, I have this concept of burning the haystack. Burning the haystack down and then looking at the needles and understanding how the needles are operating. So if I take these billion points and see how they relate to each other over in space and time, I start seeing some very interesting things happen. I start looking at money transactions happening very close in proximity to each other, going to a similar location or the same location on the other side. So now I start understanding how this data relates. And when I start boiling this down, now all of a sudden this ocean of noise and this haystack starts meaning something. And now I can see how that relates over time, and now I can see where my critical points are. Right, so now the needles fall out of the haystack, and then we use a tool called Insights to better understand those needles. So then we start pulling apart those needles, and now individuals, people, things make sense. And now we disseminate that out in a way that commanders, decision makers can understand that information. And now we just push it out via dashboards, via story maps, web-based information that I can take that knowledge that I gain and push that out in a fashion that people can understand it. That problem is getting bigger. It's not getting smaller. We have to, I'm going to reiterate, we have to change how we think. We cannot solve our problems with the same way that we created them. With the Internet of Things, we have to interrelate all of these capabilities, all of these concepts together, and the ArcGIS platform allows us and helps us to do that.